Welcome to Resilience in the Shadows, the podcast where we explore stories of courage, healing, and resilience in the face of profound challenges. I'm your host, Alex Payton, joined by my co-host and mom, Letitia Payton. Today, we are honored to have Quinn Hebert with us as we record our very first video podcast for YouTube. Quinn's journey is one of conviction and courage, from his early years as a seminarian to his work as a co-founder of the Society of St. Peter Damian, an organization dedicated to exposing abuse and advocating for accountability within the Catholic Church. As a whistleblower, Quinn has played a critical role in uncovering abuse within the Diocese of Lafayette, Louisiana, challenging one of the most deeply entrenched systems of silence and complicity. In addition to his work exposing corruption, Quinn serves as the president of the board for TentMakers of Louisiana, where he continues to stand alongside survivors, advocating for justice and meaningful change. His journey has not been without personal and professional consequences, but his dedication to truth and survivor advocacy remains unwavering. Today, we'll hear about what led Quinn to become a whistleblower, the impact of abuse within the church, and the retaliation that those who speak out often face. We'll also discuss the role of media in exposing these stories, how institutions resist change, and what it truly means to seek justice. Most importantly, we'll explore how Quinn's experiences have shaped his personal mission and the work he does today. This is a conversation about truth, resilience, and the fight for accountability. Thanks for joining us today, Quinn.
Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. We're so excited to have you with us on our podcast. You are a founding member of the Society of St. Peter Damian, which is in the Diocese of Lafayette. Can you tell us a little bit about how that society came about and your involvement?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with a little bit of my own personal backstory. Was raised Catholic, although probably in the typical sense of not knowing a whole lot, childlike faith. Went to high school at the unfortunately named John Paul the Great Academy, and really, became passionate about what Catholicism was. In hindsight, it kind of is almost like that school kind of grooms young people into being either a priest or in the religious life. So I went to seminary a year after graduating at St. Joseph Seminary College, St. Ben's in Covington. Was there for 2.5 years. I eventually left, although not for a variety of reasons, but I always intended to go back. So I didn't leave really having discerned out, as they say. I just needed to take a break. Always thought I would go back, and then ended up living about 8 years almost as a quasi-seminarian, just in my own mind, always very evangelical, probably spoke way too much, never quite learned the art of being quiet. Fortunately, or eventually, I just kind of ended up deciding, certainly not going back to seminary. But during that time, so from 2014 through I'll say 2018, because that's when the SSPD we started. But I was very passionately Catholic, wanted the good of the church, wanted to see the church thrive. So in 2018, as y'all know, that was a big year for y'all. I think for Catholics everywhere. We had the Cardinal McCarrick scandal, the Summer of Shame, where he was ultimately defrocked. Very unusual for a cardinal. So that was shocking, because it's so seldom that will happen. Or the Pennsylvania grand jury report, I forget the timeline, but that came out. So in the national news, the church was certainly in the light. Locally, of course, was when y'all case came forward. What was the month? I think that was
May. Or no, I'm sorry.
No, I don't remember.
What day did? Well, it came forward in May, I believe.
Yeah,
late May.
So around the summer. So the Summer of Shame.
Yeah.
So you had this going on nationally. We had this locally.
Ours was first, right before the McCarrick.
Okay.
If you want the actual
yeah,
timeline.
Okay. So there we go. But very close together, and this was all blowing up, all at the same time. a group of my good friends, we would meet regularly just for camaraderie and stuff. We'd always be talking about church issues. That was the topic of conversation. We were very boring. So at some point, I actually wasn't there that first night when they were talking, but we basically, how it evolved was we all know somebody or some priest, and we're like, Father so-and-so, he's kind of a little weird, or like, I wouldn't trust my kids. Everybody has some little anecdote, but nobody ever says things out loud. As good Cajuns, we gossip in the corner, but we don't actually talk about it in any productive way. And so hearing, all these scandals coming back to light, and then us thinking, we've heard these little stories before. If we don't, obviously you don't want to just gossip, you don't want to just randomly slander anybody. But if there's enough anecdotal stories, you're going to say, maybe there is something to this. So we just started saying, look, instead of just continuing to be silent like everybody always is, we ought to start documenting this in some way. And so that was kind of the brainchild of it, just a desire not to be a part of the problem and to tell the stories that could be told responsibly. So I think this kind of particular conversation happened in August. So that was a few months of thinking about everything that was going on around the country. In September was the bishop's panel discussion, wherein the bishop and a few other people at the Cathedral Hall basically wanted to address the Guidry case and the McCarrick case and basically put people at ease. And so it was supposed to be open discussion. He'd answer questions. It sounded all good, but you had to submit your questions beforehand, whatever. So you had to email them in. Then as the day comes forward, media is not allowed inside. So there was no recording. It's just supposed to be a bishop's discussion, but no recording. As the night progressed, the questions that they chose that had been sent in were obviously fielded, and the answers were scripted, and there was no recording allowed. So of course we recorded secretly from our phone. Not only were we not impressed with how it went, but I remember there were people like angry at the end of it, saying, you didn't answer our questions. Like, now is the time to, you've set this up, like, let us ask our questions. So they ended up letting a few people ask live questions, but there was a lot of, I think people were not especially impressed. One thing that was said by a lady on the panel, she said, the scandal started here in the Diocese of Lafayette. She said, it's ending here. It is true that the scandal started in the Diocese of Lafayette. Not so sure it ended yet. Excuse me. Not so sure it ended. But that brings me, I guess, this is going to be a meandering conversation, but that brings me back to kind of an important revelation, is that the Diocese of Lafayette is the epicenter of the sex abuse scandal in the modern sense.
For the listeners, if you Google Gilbert Goethe, you'll find actually SSPD has quite a few good things on that. But yeah, the scandal in the United States really cracked open with Gilbert Goethe, which oddly enough, Quinn's coined the term quite a bit, Guidry to Goethe, or Goethe to Guidry.
Yeah.
Particularly because later on we found out that Guidry was actually quite good friends with Goethe through Boy Scouts. They even were together on an assignment, right? So you can look that up. Maybe we'll even link it in the description, just because I think it's something that's very, very important for the listeners.
And Quinn, early on, I know we were receiving calls from priests around the diocese telling us things that they knew.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why exactly they felt like they needed to tell us certain things, which we did keep confidential, but we knew a lot of things, or we learned a lot of things about priests. There were maybe a couple of seminarians who were also willing to share things that they knew. Were y'all experiencing the same thing with SSPD? Were there priests who were initially sharing a lot of information about a lot of the maybe not necessarily criminal behavior, but morally incomprehensible behaviors, that if the parishioners of their churches knew what was going on, it would be like unbelievable?
Yeah, so I think, so SSPD, the way we kind of founded it, the way we decided to found it, there were pros and cons too. So I guess I'll answer that question by saying at that panel discussion, we essentially launched SSPD. Was after that. Our first or second article, our first real article was about the panel discussion. And kind of in analyzing it, we published the audio for it, so you can still listen to that original panel discussion. We launched as an anonymous group. I think back to that a lot, debating whether or not that was the best choice or not. At the time, we did it because, for one thing, some of us have reputations for speaking out on issues. And as such, there was a degree to which we didn't want our message dismissed just because, like, oh, it's them again. And then also, we were, at that time, we were going into this for the first time. We didn't know if there'd be legal action taken against whistleblowers. So for those two reasons, we launched anonymously. In hindsight, I don't think it really mattered much, but it did create a very interesting mythos almost in those early days. A point that we'll bring up in a little bit about the hellfire warning. But so to answer the question, yes, there were clergy that had reached out to us in one instance to try to help broker a meeting with the bishop. One clergy sent in an audio recording of a clergy-only meeting where the diocesan lawyer was like updating them on the what the scandal would cost the diocese or whatever. That was a very fascinating meeting. Funny enough, like nobody even mentions it. Like I don't know how many people even saw it, but that was like an early article with this audio that a priest sent in to us. I know another instance where we got information on a particular priest, but I think like the anonymity probably maybe in a certain way helped, and then in a certain way made them scared, maybe more scared to come to us than maybe to you or to your family. I don't know. It's hard to judge that.
Here's an interesting question, though. So we talk about this a lot when priests talk about the sex abuse scandal, and a lot of times it's popular figureheads, and I don't know if they necessarily intend it like this, but they'll say, it's time for the laity to step up, right? And so it's always put on the laity. So I know SSPD was like a web, right? You had clergy, seminarians giving info. Didn't mean they were necessarily part of SSPD. SSPD, you go to their website, look at the articles, look at the things discussed. I've never seen a priest attached to any of those statements. So priests might have been helping, but are you saying that it's, when it comes to just the general work of SSPD, whistleblowers, and especially those who have come out and said, we found it SSPD. They're all dads, moms.
Yeah.
So where were the priests?
Certainly.
Were they did they not stay as involved, or were they involved from a distance but not willing to ever put their name on it or have any skin in it?
They would never be. They would never put their name to it for sure. I mean, to be fair, we didn't for a long time either. I eventually went. I went on to KTC numerous times, so I was public. And then since then, pretty much we're all public. I think we signed the article we did about your dad, Deacon Scott, being excommunicated. That was years down the line after everything that had gone. And I was like, it's time to just put all our names officially on this. And what a better thing to sign to than, this, with whom are you in communion? Like the bishop who is covering up sex abuse, or this deacon dad. What's the point of communion? And I was like, let's sign our names on this one here, be done with it.
Well, I think,
and yes, so all the members are, their fathers, their husbands, they're just solid people.
So I think that leads into that's a good segue here. What kind of resistance? So SSPD, just a bunch of normal families, guys looking to...
And I would say normal guys who have better things to do than fight corruption in the church. Like, I don't know, it would be great if we had this group of people who were specifically ordained to handle this kind of stuff. And then kind of to your point, or one of you, I'm thinking also of priests that would come to us and tell us, oh, you should do this. Oh, you should say this. Oh, would you say this for me? Excuse me, Father, why do we have to do everything for you? Like, that's always something that was so annoying. It's like, yeah, we didn't mind doing our part, but then you have, like, why can't anybody have a backbone in the clergy?
Well, and part of the problem was they would come to us meaning my family member, me or my husband or even Alex, they were coming to you and saying things that they wanted public. But then they would stand with the bishop.
Yeah.
And it's like, how can you do this to us? Because we are the ones that are catching the fire. And they were like, well, people are already mad at you, so it's okay for you to do it. We don't want to say it. We don't want people to be mad at us.
Well, there's a whole host of reasons for that, I think, but that process starts in seminary. I kind of say it's an 8-year process by which they remove the backbones out of boys and then ordain them. I think seminary is a very dangerous place for that matter. It basically gives boys unearned respect, and then they become ordained, and even the quote unquote good priests have the same characteristic that's becoming more and more intolerable to me.
Well, I think that's a good point. I addressed one of my priest friends a while back who had not publicly supported us in any way, and it came down to that he was scared. And what kind of... I remember telling him, thank God you're not my actual father. You might be, don't even claim to be my spiritual father, right? If you can't stick up for me in something that's so easy, right? I mean, in our case, at least, it was so simple. I think we've already told the listeners enough, but realize he confessed. He pled guilty, right? There was never any shred. It was the easiest. It was a softball for
very
virtue
cut and
signaling,
dry.
even if you wanted to just pretend, right? It was a virtue signaler's dream to be able to experience that. But I think this leads into the resistance aspect. So at the time, as I said, normal folks, Catholic families, what sort of resistance did y'all face, either professionally, personally, and realize those in the Diocese of Lafayette will know that the Diocese of Lafayette is so entrenched into everything, even the secular world out here in this area is just inherently Catholic. So your ramifications could go even into secular areas, secular jobs that you wouldn't have guessed the church could touch you at. But so what did y'all experience with pushback from the bishop, from everyday parish priests to lay people? How did that affect y'all? Is there any specific moments that you really think stood out to you?
So I guess reading left to right, we had launched, and we basically promised information. We had a few cases already that we had documented that we were able to and then as soon as we launched, people started, just random lay people started giving us more information too. We wrote one of our members wrote a very eloquent letter to the bishop saying that we wanted to help the bishop. It wasn't a matter of taking his authority or usurping anything. We wanted to give him the information that we had, and basically we asked, would you establish an independent third-party investigation into these matters and other things, and for the good of the church, clean it up and just bring it all to light, finish this problem, at long last after 40 years. We published the letter, or we sent it to him privately. I'm sorry, it's been a long time ago now. We sent him the letter. There was no response. So we then published the letter on the website and said something to the effect of, like, if we didn't get a response in a certain amount of time, then we were just going to have to start publishing what we had. And then that's when we made the front page of the newspaper. Bishop sends fiery response to group. Basically, he had this published on all the news media saying that the diocese won't respond to bullying, I think is the
diocese will not respond to deadlines, bullying, and ultimatums issued by non-diocesan anonymous groups. I also remind such groups that slander, detraction, and defamation of character are mortally sinful. Those who commit these must receive sacramental absolution and confession, and in justice restore the good name of those offended, or risk losing everlasting life.
Mind you,
at the final judgment.
Mind you, we had not published anything really yet. Okay, it was merely the I don't want to say threat. It wasn't a threat, but merely the threat in their mind of anybody saying anything at all. You get a hellfire warning.
So at this point, you haven't even published anything about any of the information you have.
Yeah, there was nothing of substance published at that point.
I'm pretty sure
this
it was just the letter to the bishop at this point.
Yeah, like I said, we had published about the panel discussion, but yeah, there was really nothing substantial yet. Now this was real key. So there had been some private emails back and forth. So on one hand, the bishop was like, yes, I would like to meet with y'all. On the other hand, he's like, if anybody says anything at all, you're going to hell. So there was a bit of duplicity in our correspondence with Bishop Desatel during this period. Finally, 3 of our members was able to have a meeting with the bishop. Because of this duplicity, and this really blew up later, because of this duplicity, they recorded the meeting. In Louisiana, you can do that. Everybody, when this came out, they were like, I can't believe you recorded the bishop without his knowing. I was like, okay, look, he basically was lying to us already. Yeah. We had reason to believe that he would lie in this meeting or twist the truth. There was a few things discussed in the meeting. One, and then these are 3, 2 of them are pretty big cases that are still kind of ongoing, and I'd love to see resolution one day. One is about Father Gilbert Dutel, who has, I think to the average person, credible accusation, We have the documentation. Everything we've published has been documented. We've tried to be as responsible.
You can't be talking about Father Gil Dutel that the playground is named after.
Oh, yes,
right?
yes, that
Okay,
one, yeah.
right, just making sure.
The playground.
We brought that to the bishop, the information we had with that. We also brought the information we had about Father Michael Polson. And I think just link to the website. We don't have to go through all the details of these cases, but alarming stuff. And the way the bishop kind of weaved his way around excusing why Polson was still in ministry after flagrant violations of safe environment, like leaning over a table with a boy stretched out like this.
And I want to say that there was the woman who witnessed this put in writing what she witnessed and reported. And if I'm not
two different people, two separate people,
and if I'm not
things.
mistaken, and the listeners can find this on the SSPD website, but if I'm not mistaken, one incident was they walked in on Father Polson and he had a boy's head in his lap.
Yeah.
And in the other incident, he had the boy, they were wrestling or something, and he had the boy bent over a table.
Yeah.
And he had his pelvis on the boy's rear.
Yeah.
Okay. So just that this isn't just some
right.
He said these witnesses put this in writing.
Later on, I did a video interview with this lady who brought this forward, and I think the video speaks for itself. She's just a very honest, trustworthy person. You can tell when you're talking to somebody. She simply gave her story. It's 30 minutes. It's worth watching, and I think tells the story well. But anyway, brings this issue to the bishop too, and he's like, "Well, he's been corrected." Okay, Bishop, can you give us the nature of these corrections? Well, as a bishop, as a father to his child, there's certain corrections we make. And I think really this had started under Bishop Jarrell when these incidents first happened. But he assured us that it had been taken care of. But Bishop, he's still over a high school. He still has youth groups. Yeah, how it comes down to, and we see this time and time again, actions that are indicative of more. What is the point of safe environment if you're like, oh, well, don't do that. You bent over a child onto a table. That's just indiscretions. But it's been corrected. But you don't move. You don't see that this is behavior that means something. Kind of like, that was one thing I was going to say, is I first kind of started reading about Goethe back when I was in seminary. I don't remember what source I read. I don't remember how that came up, but I remember reading it and thinking, oh, well, thank goodness we've cleaned up our act and we don't do this kind of stuff anymore. When I left seminary, that was 2014, that's when the Dutel thing came to the public light. I don't remember hearing about it at the time because they did a good job of sweeping that under the rug. It was only later on, like when we started SSPD and stuff, researching the history. And I think the best book, and it's fascinating if you want to read about what happened in the Diocese of Lafayette in the 80s, is Jason Berry, a very good reporter from New Orleans, wrote Lead Us Not Into Temptation. And it covers a lot of information. The first third is specifically about the Diocese of Lafayette. Fascinating read, definitely recommend it. But you have issues like when Gilbert Goethe was in Abbeville under Monsignor Richard Mouton.
Very popular figure in the Diocese of Lafayette. I remember when I worked at a little bookstore, I sold his biography,
his memoirs.
He was a Monsignor. I think he was even was he a delegate or something at Vatican II? It was something.
Yeah. I think that's how he got his Monsignorship.
Yes, that's right. So extraordinary figure in the Diocese of
Very
Lafayette.
popular. So when Goethe was in Abbeville under him, Monsignor had a very brilliant idea to prevent the children from going into Goethe's room through the window. He moved Goethe upstairs. Very, very good solution there.
And in a deposition, if I'm not mistaken, it was Richard Mouton in a deposition after the boys were done being molested by Gauthier, raped by Gauthier, he would then bring them in for confession, right, to make them confess.
Well, so excuse me, much after everything had come out, he did offer the parent or the dad of the 3 kids who had gotten molested. He had offered to hear their confession. I guess. Look, I don't want to be too cynical. I guess as a priest, you want to give the sacrament to everybody, but to imply that somehow the child was guilty or had a dirty soul because of this is kind of insane. Part of the point of this too is Gauthier had been reported at some point for, in some texts it says licking a boy's face. Don't know if that was a kiss or an actual full-on lick, but obviously something pretty, I think that would be a violation of safe environment. And they said, well, it was just this one incident or whatever. And then he continued being a priest and molested probably hundreds of children. My point in bringing all of this up is you look at our history and you have this kind of incident. We bring to Bishop Desautels a matter of Poulsen leaning over a child. That is the same essential thing. It's a violation of safe environment. It's something that shouldn't happen with an adult with a child. And his response was exactly what they said in the 80s. It's been corrected. Do we learn? We don't learn anything. This diocese doesn't learn not a single thing. It's history that repeats itself. So, like you kind of mentioned earlier, from Gauthier to Guidry, we have a 40-year history wherein nothing really has substantially changed, except maybe they might have gotten slightly better at covering certain things up. But their status quo of how to, their reaction to an accusation is pretty much the same thing.
So it blows my mind that even the terminology they've used 40 years ago, 50 years ago, whatever, did not change. The way they handle the cases did not change. And they always throw out there, well, we have safe environment to protect everyone.
What good does it do?
What good does it do?
You don't. First of all, I think it's a pretty flimsy program to begin with. I don't think it actually does a whole lot. But then if you're not even going to apply the rules or enforce the rules, what good is it? It's pure window dressing to say, oh, we're doing something.
Well, and I know in Guidry's deposition, Christy asked him, how did your life change after the Dallas Charter? And he said it didn't. There was nothing that changed with him as a priest. No new rules, nothing to follow, no need to change your behaviors, nothing. It almost makes me believe that the only thing that changed was optics in the church, in the way that they could brush it aside, keep it under cover. And in fact, it makes me believe also that this is where they were able to get the laity involved in cover up. Because, and I'm not sure, I don't want to imply that the laity were covering it up, but what I'm saying is the manipulation there where the laity just truly believe that there's nothing going on because safe environment took all of it and we have none of these problems anymore. And then that gave the laity the power to literally go after people who were whistleblowers.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good transition to, I think one of the main points that we should talk about is whistleblowers. So the most difficult aspect of telling these stories is so many people will bring us information, but we don't want to put our name to it. And obviously, we talked about like priests doing that, but lay people too, because of the fact that they are scared if they're a Catholic and they're a Catholic business owner, if they would speak out, would their business suffer for it? Whatever, there's a lot of fear or even just social ostracization, however you say that. So how many people, And we can't publish. We can't just say, oh well, we heard this. Like we need, even if you want to be anonymous, we at least have to have somebody who would be willing to say something. Nobody wants to do it. But it's to me that's so important that people need to start speaking out.
With SSPD, you've worked with whistleblowers. You've worked with survivors who have whistleblown. You've worked with lay people who have witnessed things. How does the church treat them? How did that experience go working with whistleblowers and helping them through the process?
So to a certain degree, I think that people need to stop being so scared because ultimately there's not a whole lot that they can do to you. I think that the threat, even because we were worried about legal, being sued and whatever, ultimately, I don't think if they would sue us, we could then, which you can fish for documents there. I mean, it'd be very foolish to sue for the church to do that. But so on one hand, I think the threat is a little bit exaggerated and people shouldn't be so scared to come forward. But on the other hand, it is true. Like if you're a Catholic business person, things could happen. If you're in social circles, obviously it would be very, I think before we started, I was saying how I was at a particular mass and Bishop Desitel was coming in and giving the blessing, and then he saw me and we locked eyes and his face just got stony and he just kind of kept on walking. So I mean, like
You didn't get a blessing?
I didn't get a blessing.
To hell with you, Quinn.
I guess, yeah.
straight there.
And I mean, like, I don't care about that, but some people would. Like that could really rattle you. I think if your bishop, kind of frowns at you or whatever, or if your Catholic friends, obviously y'all reap most of this abuse more than we did, but people who you thought were your Catholic friends turn their back on you. Obviously, that affects some people more than others. I don't think that's an excuse not to come forward with information, but I could understand why people feel that way.
And I think, once again, for the listeners, go to the website. I mean, what we've discussed here so far with like the Polson case, the Dutel case, it's not like SSPD just took this out of nowhere, right? There's documents, like legal documents, public documents, eyewitnesses. So we're not talking about a group that just woke up one day and started saying, screw the church, they're all pedos.
It would be so fun to make an SSPD tabloid, but unfortunately you would lose all your credibility. So we can't just publish everything we hear.
And everything is documented.
We have about 20 articles, and like when I go back and reread them, I'm like, man, we're pretty good. Yeah.
Well, also, y'all started as a result of, a lot of the stuff that was happening with us and then McCarrick.
Yeah.
But when you started, it wasn't like all of a sudden these people just came out with all these stories. These are like some of them old stories that people
the Polson
had kept.
That was like from 2014 when they made these letters. They sent it to the diocese saying this is what we've seen, and they're just sitting there and seeing nothing being done. We launch, so they send it to us, and we try to help that narrative along. But.
And I think too, just going back to something Quinn said about whistleblowers not wanting to come out and they're scared. I think one of the whistleblowers on the Polson case, in writing, I forgot if it was, correct me, I forgot if it was a police report or just another complaint, but she had said that she was walking in a parking lot one time and Polson pretended to run her over with his car. He kept turning his car to her because he knew that she had caused some ruckus.
Well, I don't remember the exact timeline on that. I think that it happened before she wrote the letters because she included it in the letter. I don't know the timeline, but that's kind of crazy.
Weird.
That's priestly behavior.
Well, and another thing, so going back to Polson, which I don't want to make this whole thing about Polson, but to this day, Polson is still alone with teenage boys because people in the city where he is currently serving will send me pictures and tell me, wait, I thought that the priests were not supposed to be alone with boys. Why is he here? And I'm like, send me a picture. And so they'll send me pictures. But I guess part of the thing I'm trying to say, or the point I'm trying to make, is that it's still ongoing. It's still happening.
yeah.
They're not following anything. And you would think at this point, with everything that is going on, that somebody would be behaving, and somebody would be watching over this.
Then you have, like in Guidry's deposition, he's talking about this priest support group with 2 other priests, Buddy Bro and
Harold Trahan.
Harold
Well, there were 7 other priests.
Well,
I
there were
think 6
7,
or
but
7.
he mentions these
these two
that he told, and I remember figuring out the timeline. It had to have been within a month of Oliver's abuse that he tells 2 other priests. So this is what, 2015?
Yeah.
2015. So as early as 2015, 7 other priests, but these 2 that we know knew of this abuse. Now, did they tell somebody and it just didn't go anywhere? Maybe they did the right thing. These are mandatory reporters, right? Mandatory, what you call
Mandatory
it?
reporters, yeah.
A priest
Actually, I'm not
is?
sure
No?
if they are. I'm not sure if the priests are
Yes,
in the
they
state of Louisiana. Maybe they are.
They are.
But also,
So again, priests know what's going on. I can tell you from seminary, gossip, information spreads. So these priests know what's going on. They don't say anything. What could have happened differently if this would have come out in 2015 instead of 2018? How the safety of children and the healing that could have occurred had a priest handled this.
well, and absolutely, because Monsignor Mallette told us that Oliver is not the only victim. We just don't know who the others are. He said Guidry didn't wake up and do this, and this be the only one at his age. So
By the
by
way, that's
not
just
coming,
what they'll say behind closed doors.
right?
Yeah.
That's
They'll
just
never
what
say
they'll
that
say
publicly.
behind closed doors. But
But we also know that.
Yeah.
But we don't know how many other boys there may be that were serving at our church that could have, after Oliver,
After that.
that took Oliver's place, because he immediately fell away, which is a whole other story. But are there other boys that could have been serving at the church?
That means there's blood on these other priests' hands.
Correct.
So we were talking about the connection with Gothay and Guidry. So they were friends. Gothay would have Guidry do some of his masses and vice versa. Gothay was head of the Boy Scouts, of course, and we found the document. I think he is the one who recommended Guidry to be head of the Boy Scouts. So, and we know that somebody doesn't just wake up at 75 and say, "Oh, let me diddle a little boy."
Yeah.
So Gothay got caught fairly quick in the 80s.
After hundreds, sadly, were abused.
After hundreds, and he was
Hundreds.
caught quickly. Guidry?
50 years a priest.
50
and
years
working
of
in
priest.
the chancery.
He was one that wasn't caught. Not to speculate, but how many hundreds, thousands? Yeah.
Or
it's
victims
crazy.
out there that we don't know about.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish
So
that.
Right.
to shift the conversation here, I remember during that time, you and me had many conversations, and you were trying to save the church from within the church.
That was the goal. In fact, I remember. I think I've told Miss Letitia before too. My goal was not so much victim oriented. I wanted to fix the church, because the church is the bride of Christ, and it's our source of salvation, and this is a terrible scar on our mother. And I think we were all naive enough to think that maybe we actually might be able to fix this issue. As time has gone by, I mean, I certainly still want to, we kind of joke and say we'll just be the gadfly on the bottom of the bishop, just kind of, we're here, people are watching you, you're not, some degree of accountability. But my goal is no longer, you can't change the Catholic Church. And we would have never succeeded. Now, certainly, especially being involved with TentMakers, I'm far more victim oriented now than I was before, because that's the only thing that you have in front of you that you can actually help. Church is not doing anything differently. They've been operating like a mafia for going on 2,000 years.
And I think you don't say this, but I know as someone on the outside looking in, I feel like I can say this. I want to, before we really get into TentMakers and the kind of change in orientation to what you were, the goal which you were trying to achieve, there was a particular case, and of course we're not going to mention names of victims, and there's ongoing suits and what have you, but there was a particular victim that I think you had gotten very involved and close with, helping this particular victim go to the right people, and it involved the Jesuits in Grand Coteau. Can you give us as many details as you can, but not going too far, but give us the details on what happened here, what you experienced. And I think it was probably for you, your first time meeting a survivor who was very damaged. And how did that affect you and lead you to where you are now?
Yeah, that's that was an amazing period of just how much information. And I mean, I spent hours and hours and hours talking, getting her statement. We eventually were able to get her to a good lawyer to get like more professional help. But she was what a beautiful soul. She was one of the people who didn't mind her story being told. In fact, she wanted her story to be told. And I think that ended up helping her healing process. And she had a very good friend who was walking with her and helping her. In fact, the friend is the one who contacted SSPD. But and her story was so crazy. It's like one of those that you're like, how did all of this happen? So in Grand Coteau, there's the Jesuit. It used to be the Jesuit seminary and the big facility, and they had the retreat center. And she grew up in Grand Coteau, and she was abused by numerous priests there from. I don't remember all the details now, but from probably 6 or 7 or whatever until probably she was 20. And some people are like, how, you couldn't leave. And I'm sure you fielded that question a lot. And it's like, well, no, you're brainwashed and trapped in a
and I want to give some context too. This happened wasn't it the 60s or 70s?
No, I think it was more the 80s.
Okay, so the 80s, but also she was a minority and young.
Yeah.
And so there was also weird racial elements as a part of her abuse as well, which I think kind of entrapped her.
Yeah. And certainly nobody's going to believe a little black girl from Grand Coteau. I mean, people don't believe victims in general, and then you have that racial issue from the 80s. I mean, these poor people didn't stand a chance. Just amazing. So I'm very glad that we were able to tell her story and connect her with a good lawyer. That was part of the learning curve there too. Just like y'all had to figure things out for the first time as y'all were going through it. Like, how do you find a lawyer? How do you find somebody who can specifically handle your case the appropriate way?
But also
dealing with trauma and stuff like that.
Talking with the survivor, because I remember you would get frustrated with her, not in a bad way, but you would get frustrated with her because of just you'd ask certain questions or you were trying to help. And I think at times it almost seemed like she was working against you, but not intentionally. So, but you were dealing with someone who had been so damaged, and I don't think had any professional help at any point. So what was that like, having to walk that tightrope?
Well, again, a learning curve. I don't have trauma counseling skills. I hardly know how to talk to a victim. This is all just new things. So a learning curve to know, okay, like something you might say perfectly innocently is maybe triggering and or brings out anger or something like that. Also learning your boundary that like this is your story, this isn't my story. It has to be told the way you want it to be told in the way that you want to do that. So learning, certainly that's been this whole process has been such a great learning experience. And I'm just grateful to have been in a position to do that kind of work, and now with TentMakers to continue that.
So Quinn, you moved from being sort of on the front lines to help the church to understand the problem, realizing the church understands very well what the problem is. The problem is they don't want to change anything about how they run their operation, their business, their private lives,
it's the Roman Empire.
Right.
I'm now pretty much convinced of that. The Roman Empire never fell. It became the church. I think somebody else has said that recently on the podcast.
I
agree with that.
So I remember when you first came into, working with us at TentMakers, you had to sort of shift a little bit from that mindset to going directly to helping victims and survivors of sex abuse. How did you evolve with that from, when you, let's just say, just walked through the door at TentMakers and we were like, hey, now we're working with victims and we're very victim-centered. How did you have to adjust to that, and what have you seen, the changes in you and the way you see the church sex abuse crisis?
Yeah. I think initially I was worried that my focus wouldn't be enough on the survivors because I was still, after, trying to fix corruption and for the sake of the church, which that's kind of funny too. I think at first I was worried that I wouldn't be survivor oriented, but that also, I guess, starting with TentMakers happened at the same time that I realized that the church is not reformable. So I kind of gave up that idea, which then all you have left are the people in front of you. So I guess that transition happened organically, and I think I'm left with the better half of that equation. It's much more enjoyable being in communion with the lowly than with pedophile protectors, which is part of kind of my evolution of thinking on the church. Is like Roman Catholicism is a paper religion. As long as you subscribe to the right authority figure, it doesn't matter what they do. They could commit crimes, they could cover up, they can do it as long as you submit to this chair. How can you be in communion with a chair? It's kind of weird. You're in communion with people. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of having communion. It's a communion of people.
So being on this side, how do you see the relationship between the victims and the church, and how they treat that side of the whole equation?
How the church treats?
Yes, how the church treats their own victims. These are the victims, literally the victims of the church. But being on this side, how do you see the church differently as to how it treats the victims? Because now you're not looking at the church trying to help the church, but now you're looking at the church trying to make the church see its own victims.
Yeah, I mean, I think I recognized that even before, but and just as time goes on, you hear more and more stories. You see that this is not just a one-off incident where the church is re-victimizing victims. I mean, just y'all case was fascinating. The duplicity and the behind closed doors, they'll say one thing, then but publicly they'll say another, and it's so. I guess now dealing with survivors and being able to walk with them, It continues to be obvious with how the church treats them, and if the church won't do the right thing, then thank God we have a few other people who will step up and help out.
Now, one thing I know people talk about is that if we just go back to the traditional Latin Mass, we wouldn't have to worry about all these problems, because way back then, the priests weren't committing these crimes. But that is so untrue. Can you speak to that?
So I think all of my friends would laugh.
We're getting into some niche cultural Catholic
Because I kind of started appreciating the Latin Mass in seminary, and then after leaving and I had the freedom to go wherever I wanted, I became a full-on trad, and spoke ad nauseum about its merits and trying to get everybody I knew to recognized that the church had been infiltrated in the 30s, in the 20s, and the Vatican II, and the Mass and the liturgy and all of that. So I definitely subscribed and thought, well, yeah, you don't really see these abuses in trad circles until you do. The SSPX had their scandal, I think.
FSSP.
Yeah.
Well, we've come across so many older
people.
Yeah,
and yeah,
so
the idea
it didn't matter if you were trad or not. It was happening before the Novus
this
Ordo
has gone
Mass.
on for centuries.
Right.
I mean, this is, that was definitely a red herring as far as that goes. And then also, I think it all amounts to the same thing, whether you're trad or what we call normie Catholic or whatever. There's still, you brought up something about lay people covering up, not that they're trying to, but it's part of the conditioning. In both situations, both trad and regular, you have subscribed to this particular paradigm of religion, and you have to not only evangelize and bring more people to it, you also have to protect it and defend it. And I think in the Catholic world, it is kind of a funny war, a liturgy war between trads and Novus Ordo Catholics. But it all kind of amounts to the same thing. You don't want to damage the look of the church. So breaking, I think one thing that I hope through SSPD, that we may have started to break that, the grasp that the church has on people, to where they're willing to at least recognize and admit that the problem is still ongoing, and you can't just keep pretending like it's not there.
Okay, so I think to wrap everything up, Quinn, as we're approaching the end, just to talk about something a little more modern, something that's happening right now, and I think it ties into a lot of what you've already discussed. Right now, we have the Father Martins debacle. For those who don't know, Father Martins is a popular priest, I guess, around the world, around the country. I don't know, but he's very popular. He's an exorcist.
He has a podcast.
Does he have a podcast?
Yes.
I don't know. He does something, right? And he's recently been arrested. There was an event where this is what's alleged by the witnesses, where he took a young girl's hair and put it in his mouth and was flossing with it, and then apparently sat behind her and kept growling at her. And this girl goes home, dad asks her about her day, and she relays all of this. He calls the parish priest, which this is real quick, he's a forgotten man in this whole story. The parish priest called the police. So I want to make it very clear that in this situation, we have a parish priest who did something, and we're going to talk about the consequences that he's faced for doing this, by the way. But point is, parish priest calls the police. Long story short, state of Illinois where this happened, Father Martins was there because he was showing a relic of St. Jude. And that is apparently a misdemeanor over there. It is battery. And the father pressed charges. It has ignited a war on social media because Father Martin supporters say that this is a step too far. And I had someone say that I'm neurotic and that this is just normal behavior, and that Father Martin's he was trying to build rapport with the children, because that's how middle-aged men build rapport with children, is they put hair in their mouth. But point is, this was, in my opinion, the most modern, publicized test of safe environment. And the only person who's passed is the parish priest who called the police, and the few priests online and other people, I call them normal people, who think that this is weird behavior, who have called out that this is a safe environment violation. But as a whole, online, the father has been attacked as a neurotic, angry liberal. By the way, we know nothing about the father. We don't know what he is. As of now, we just know that he's a dad who doesn't like middle-aged men putting his daughter's hair in their mouth. And the parish priest has been tied in. But now, since Father Martin's is a fighter of the devil, this is Satan's attack and yada, yada. But I think it's important to bring up this case because a lot of people are pointing to his intentions. Well, his intentions were pure. We don't know that. But the point is, even if his intentions were pure, your best case scenario is a priest has violated safe environment. It's what happens when you violate safe environment. You get reported for it. And it just so happens that in this state, it was also a crime that occurred. And worst case scenario is you have a Gothe repeat, a repeat of the Gothe with the licking, right? Whether it was a small kiss, a lick, whatever it was, right? Where it points to something worse. Father Michael Guidry used to put his hand on everyone's back and do a stomach punch where he'd like touch your belly, right? And so I don't know how familiar you are with the Father Martin's case, but I just think it was important to mention that since at the time of recording this podcast, that the news just came out recently about some of the other details about what he's done. But I think it points to, number one, the Gothe thing that you had mentioned about the lick, but also the weaponization of the laity. I mean, if you go online, you'll see why the church doesn't feel the need necessarily to say too much. I mean, you have individuals who are saying that in response to this, you need to bring priests around kids even more. You have priests who have said that, and they're saying this very somber. They go, well, as a priest, we just can't, do like normal people do around kids. No one does this. No one does this. I have never done this to a child before. I've never also felt the need to build rapport with minors. But besides that, if you're a youth minister or something like that, which I was, when I built rapport, it never involved touching anyone. Actually, we had a no-touch rule in my youth group where there was no hugs. It was all fist bumps, handshakes, right? Like the only time they ever hugged me was whenever I was leaving, and all the parents were there, right? Everyone was there, and there was a hey, your kid wants to hug me. Is that good? We're right there. It was all side hugs, right? I'm not bear hugging children, right. But that this is not normal behavior, and that if you took away his collar, as we like to refer to it as white collar privilege, but if you took away his collar,
and Catholics have collar blindness.
They have collar blindness, that's correct. And if you took away all of that, and this was just some guy, some dude, some middle-aged man, no one would stand for this behavior anywhere, right? Like this is abnormal behavior. It's weird. It could point to deeper problems, but it also points to social immaturity. Even if his intentions were pure, there's this weird thing where priests somehow don't seem to realize that the average Joe doesn't do this.
Yeah.
Right.
I think another important maybe part of the Martin's case is I think one of the criticisms we get a lot is, well, you're always harping about these old cases like Gothe, that was in the 80s, and all this stuff happened in the 80s, and things are cleaned up now. I mean, maybe there's fewer pedophiles in the clergy now than in the 80s, because the seminary is, I mean, I still don't like the way the seminaries are, but it was worse in the 60s and 70s. But I think cases like this are important because, okay, yeah, we had a lot of issues in the 80s. We have Guidry, David Broussard, Roby Robichaud, Jody Semino. Now, those last two, I think the abuse happened a long time ago, but they were serving as priests up until 2018, 2019, I think.
Well, I was about to say, please define long time ago, because really in the whole aspect of things, that's not really long time ago.
You're right.
They would like for you to believe that was long time ago, but these are still priests who are fairly young.
Yeah, they're still active.
Right.
It's very possible that other priests are old but still abusing. Obviously, Guidry was 75 or whatever. But I mean, the Martins case, there's still things going on. I mean, Polson broke the safe environment 2014. It's not just a thing of the past. And as I think we kind of talked about, the strategy of dealing with it is the same as in the past. So, again, if you watch the video of the interview with the lady about the eyewitness of
which we're going to make
stuff,
sure to link in the
I love the way it ends. I simply asked, I said, are children safe in the Diocese of Lafayette? And she said, no, they're not. No, they're not. Absolutely not. So guard them. And I thought that was just that's unnerving. That's frightening. And most people don't see it. They put their blinders on. They love their little priest in their parish, who may be a halfway decent guy. I guess I just want to say, I have several friends who are priests, and it's a struggle for me to separate, I guess, because as priests, all of them collectively, make me angry. But I need to. It's about dealing with the individual in front of you. I think that's the same for survivors as even priests. I don't want to be enemies with anybody. I have a lot of compassion and love for individuals who happen to be priests. It's a difficult line to walk, but I'm really trying to treat priests as the case may be, maybe a friend. Treat it as a friend, not as a priest. I could care less about your priesthood. But I happen to know you for 10, 15 years. I don't know, side note. But I often get told that, I'm too negative and too cynical and stuff. But
well, Quinn, speaking about negative and cynicism, let's get you to say what I know you listen to the podcast. Sure hope you do. You're the chair of our board. So you know that at the end of every podcast, we ask our guests to say something to the listeners. So as you know, we are listened to in over 10 different countries. We know that there are survivors who listen to us. We know there are families of survivors, and then we know that there's Catholics who are wondering what the hell's going on, what the hell do I do? And then there's also just people who are interested in all of this, people who want to know these things. So two different addresses I want you to do, though. So you are not a survivor, but you've worked with survivors. You are on our board. So speak a brief message to survivors. And then secondly, I speak to those who are listening, who have seen, maybe experienced things that were violations of safe environment, seem like violations of safe environment, and they haven't had the courage to come forward. We don't blame them. We understand that this is rough, but they don't have the courage. What do you say to those people, and what encouragement do you give them to come out and fight for what they know is right?
So I guess I'll answer the second one first. I think, as I said before, there could potentially be negative consequences to speaking out. That is possible. Especially, the more prestige you have, the more you have to lose. Fortunately, I don't have any, so I was never too worried about losing anything. You can't lose anything if you don't have anything to lose. So I definitely recognize that some people have more to lose. But also, in general, it's just the threat isn't as big, I think, as a lot of people assume it is. Because if you're in South Louisiana, everybody's Catholic. Your social standing is based on which priest you know and everything like that. The illusion may be that you have a lot to lose, but really, what are they going to do? I mean, for things like SSPD, if somebody has something to share, I mean, it can be confidential. We don't have to say, oh, so-and-so said this. And I think a lot of times people also they assume that what they know isn't that important. You mentioned, we saw Father so-and-so with alone with a kid somewhere. I know we had one person reach out and told us another prominent Monsignor, they saw him at a restaurant alone with a young kid, and they were like, well, that seemed weird. People see things like this, but they think, oh, that's weird, but it's not that important. Documentation is key. Okay, so maybe you saw it, and it's not that big of a deal. You saw it this one time, but what if 10 other people have seen it in the past month? Well, if we start documenting all of this stuff, and I have files on most priests, and anytime I hear something, I might not be able to prove it, so I'm not going to publish it, but it goes in the file. And slowly but surely, all those little stories add up, and you start getting the bigger picture of what's going on, and it's very alarming. So I would say, even to anybody who has seen something, don't be a part of the problem. Silence is what has bred this problem. I mean, I would like for you to send it to us, but you don't have to. Send it to somebody who is in a position to document this and who will tell the truth. So the first question.
To survivors.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have the firsthand experience of the trauma that survivors have gone through. But I've been fortunate to be in the positions I've been in enough to have had the conversations, to have talked with them and walked with them. And what I'm gathering is everybody has their own path, so there's not a one-size-fits-all for healing. A lot of people have been enormously helped by coming forward and telling their story. Not necessarily on a podcast, not necessarily on a website, but to one of us at TentMakers. I know a lot. Ms. Letitia's talked to a lot of people, far more than I have, but one of us is available to listen. And I think this may be the closest thing to a universal cookie cutter application, is that having somebody listen and believe you is enormous, as a step to healing. And I know everybody on the board and involved with TentMakers, we have a policy of we believe you. There is no question. We will listen and believe. So if there's any survivors out there who haven't had that listening ear, TentMakers is about the best you're gonna get. And I think just the work that we've done over the past year is a testament to that. So you are welcome, and we would welcome you. And that's my goal now. Since the church refuses to do it, we might as well do it, and we're here for you.
Thanks, Quinn. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Quinn.
You're welcome. Thank you.
As we wrap up this episode of Resilience in the Shadows, we want to extend our deepest gratitude to Quinn Hebert for sharing his powerful story with us today. His journey as a whistleblower, survivor advocate, and leader in the fight for accountability is a testament to the courage it takes to stand against institutional silence. Quinn's work reminds us that secrecy protects both the abuser and the church, allowing it to remain a cycle of abuse, lack of transparency, and failure to deliver justice for victims. The more these stories are exposed, the clearer it becomes. Silence isn't just complicity, it's a choice to uphold a broken system. We want to recognize Quinn for his dedication to survivors through the TentMakers of Louisiana and the Society of St. Peter Damian. If you'd like to learn more about his work or the mission of TentMakers, visit www.tentmakers.la. Thank you for joining us today. If this episode resonated with you, please share it, because awareness leads to accountability, and accountability leads to change. Stay strong, stay informed, and we'll see you next time on Resilience in the Shadows. And remember, even in the shadows, there is light.